FM and AM 1160. And good morning to you. Thanks so much for being with us here today on this Friday. And our conversation with Pat Farabaugh is brought to you by Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Lives here in Indiana, teaches at St. Francis, and he's written a wonderful book, Disastrous Floods and the Demise of Steel in Johnstown. The foreword is by Richard Burkert, who's the president and CEO of Johnstown Area's Heritage Association. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you here with us here today because this is something that has impacted our area and of course more than other areas, being the Johnstown flood, but it has also sort of served as a picture of what happened to the steel industry, not only here but all over this half of the United States. And it really points out how important the steel industry was to the economy around here. It's never recovered, has it?
No, it really hasn't. And it was critical to this area. The book that David McCullough, the historian, wrote on the 1889 flood, he says, quoting him, the age of steel can fairly be said to have begun here in Johnstown, in the community just down the road. And it's still trying to figure out what its next act is. It was tied, like so many Rust Belt cities, to one industry for so long, rode the ebbs and flows of the steel industry, and there were booms and bust periods. And it's a city a lot like Youngstown, Ohio, a lot like Steubenville, Pennsylvania, and other cities like that resilience of the people is remarkable, but still hasn't been able to find what that next act's going to be.
Yeah, and that's a good way to put it. It has we've been behind this sort of the wall of trying to find a way to break through to some sort of new economy in this area since this one went down. I told you before, I was raised in Bolivar. We at one point had 7 working brickyards. It was the brickyard capital of the United States. The floods took care of those too. When an industry goes as it did here, and we want to talk about how the flood contributed to that happening, the floods, I should say, plural. When those industries go down and the economies of the towns and the people living in them, when they are stricken so badly, it really does kill towns, doesn't it?
It does. It does. When you have an industry that is thriving, the way you go all the way back to the Cambria Iron Works, it employed so many people. So many people raised their families on that industry. And Johnstown, like a lot of other these steel cities, it was uniquely situated. It had the coal to run the mills in the mountains above. And so it had a lot of advantages to that. And, you want a diversified economy so you can weather difficult times when they come and when things change. And we're certainly in a period of change right now in the energy industry. These cities, these people, sometimes they're sort of blamed. Well, why aren't they reviving? Why aren't they revitalizing? And it's not their fault necessarily. It's just the changes in the economy. It's inevitable in some ways that there's going to be a big change period. Now, it's been a long time. The mills, Bethlehem closed most of its mills during the 1980s, and we're now 2021. It's been a long time, and Johnstown's had a lot of challenges. And, I do think the future is bright there, but it's a lot to overcome.
Floods in 89, 36, 77, the 3 major floods in Johnstown. Did they accelerate what was going to be the inevitable anyway, the demise of the steel industry around these parts, or did they cause the demise?
They accelerated. They did not cause. After the 1889 flood that killed over 2,000 people, recovery was pretty quick. The Cambria Iron Works got back up and running in shorter. The St. Patrick's Day flood of 1936, it was the least catastrophic in terms of loss of life of these 3 major floods. Of course, there have been other flooding events. I mean, Hurricane Ida, just a few weeks ago, there was concerns about the Wilmore Dam, and they evacuated parts of that area. So I don't want to suggest there's only been 3 floods. The 77 flood, Todd, it accelerated. You're exactly right. The writing was on the wall for Bethlehem Steel and other steel manufacturers. We had aluminum. We had plastics. We had not a lot of barriers of entry for foreign steel for many years. We had the process of making steel was changing. Bethlehem Steel they were slow at the switch to initiate some of these technological changes. That left them behind. When 77 happened, in a way, it created an excuse or an opportunity for them to shut down. It accelerated it a little
Sure.
more sooner, as you mentioned, but the writing was on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
The way steel was produced and the energy industry, on a broader spectrum, it was changing.
What about the rail industry? Because that's a key part of all of this as well. And there are many people who will tell you that it killed the rail industry in this area too.
I, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. It's an interesting history that we have because you had the Erie Canal system, northern part of the state, so successful. The southern part of the state wanted to rival that, so they put in the mainline canal system. And between Hollidaysburg and Johnstown, it was too rugged terrain. So where the canal came to Hollidaysburg, they couldn't use their locks and their channel system through that mountainous area, so they put a railroad there. Of course, people know you can see the horseshoe curve when you're going down into Altoona, and then that hooked up with the canals again at Johnstown. So there's a lot of history here with regards to the rails. I do not think that the rail industry was did it accelerate the fact that we didn't transport raw materials that way as much as we did? Yeah, but not it didn't. The floods did not have a dramatic effect on the rail industry.
What will people find in your book, Disastrous Floods and the Demise of Steel in Johnstown? Again, we're talking with Pat Farabaugh today. What went into the book? What motivated you to write the book?
Well, I read David McCullough's book,
Mm-hmm.
and I found it fascinating. And he wrote about the 1889 flood. He wrote about the steel industry, which is what I write about, only I carry it through the 77 flood of roughly 50 years ago, 45 years ago. So that was a catalyst. I love local history. I teach communications at St. Francis, but I tell my history colleagues I'd love to be talking history all day. And my grandfather, my mom's dad, John Earl Boland, he was a coal miner in a Bethlehem steel mine and a number of other mines. He hurt his back, fractured his back working in a mine at Bethlehem. And I remember him telling me about the recovery, telling me about the life of a miner. And so I was intrigued by that. So that was a catalyst to answer one of your questions. What you find in the book is sort of a mix. You find a lot about the history of the steel industry, the ebbs and flows of the labor movement, the unions. For a long time, the mines and the mills in this area were not unionized. And when the labor movement arrived, they negotiated some healthy pensions,
Mm-hmm.
big vacation packages, and that also exacted a toll on Bethlehem because they were ultimately unable to pay those pensions that were negotiated by the union. So I talk a little about, well, actually a lot about the ebbs and flows of the steel industry. Charles Schwab, Eugene Grace, the former CEOs, talk about them. And then intertwined with all of that is the floods, because when I was looking for publishers, they were like, "Why aren't these two different books?" And I said, I want to keep them together, the flood history and the steel industry's history in this region, because they're so intertwined. I don't think you do justice for one without talking about both.
Yeah, the floods really were a knockout blow from a fighter already reeling. The Japanese steel invasion in the 1970s and 80s is a big part of this too, isn't it?
Absolutely. International steel prices. Again, Bethlehem made mistakes. They were vertically integrated. There was a lot of insulated nature, and they didn't have a lot of forward thinking happening at the administrative level. And so they rested on what they always had done, which was we'll get a boom. We'll get back. World War II, boom for the steel industry. Korea, Vietnam War, those got them back on level footing when they had pitfalls that they had encountered. And they banked on that model, and they fell behind. Japanese steel was being produced through the blast oxygen furnace process. Bethlehem was asleep at the switch when other companies were moving forward with technology, and the imports it was so much cheaper to produce in Japan.
Yeah.
And so they could get it here, and low barriers of entry at the time really contributed to, there were a number of factors. Like I said, other products, low barriers of entry for foreign steel, and then at least specifically as it relates to Bethlehem, some mistakes at the management level.
That 77 flood, which so many of us remember, and the effect that it had here in Indiana County as well as all over. When you go through Johnstown now, and you first round those curves coming down out of Brownsville and Morelville, and you round the curves and come across, there's the river running right alongside the road. And across there you see the enormous steel plants, what's left of them. It really is the story of the demise of the steel industry in this region, isn't it?
Yeah, in some ways, time stood still for some of those buildings and structures.
Yeah.
Johnstown's working hard, but I mean, before the pandemic, they had some momentum in terms of economic development. They just had an initiative downtown earlier this week, so they are, the folks there are working hard. But it was a shot, another shot, and then the ironic part is where they're at, as I mentioned earlier, the bottom of the valley. Little Conemaugh and the Stony Creek, they form the Conemaugh, which connects to the Allegheny. They were in a great location that's why steel started there. But then they're also in a bad location in terms of they're at the bottom of a valley. The water has nowhere to go.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing whole story. It's just fascinating. And when you think, as you point out, the World War II, Korea especially, it was such a boom time for Johnstown and for Pittsburgh and the steel industry around these areas. And they probably did think that this is going to carry them through for a long, long time. And to turn that quickly into such a wrecked industry has to have been a shock, not only to the people living there, but to the leaders of these steel companies that bear a lot of the blame for it.
Yeah, 77 was it was a perfect storm. They had a fire underground in Pittsburgh, Bethlehem did, that they couldn't contain earlier in the year. At their plant up in Erie, their Lackawanna plant, they had a tremendous snowstorm that forced operations to shut down there for an extended period of time before July of 77, when the damage was significant to their Bethlehem operations. And again, those things didn't cause Bethlehem's demise, but they absolutely sped it up, and the writing was on the wall. It was going to happen regardless.
Pretty fitting that you use the word perfect storm there. The book is called Disastrous Floods and the Demise of Steel in Johnstown. Pat Farabaugh has been our guest. Where do people get this?
You can get it on Amazon. It comes out on the 18th. It comes out next Monday.
Okay.
So you can pre-order now. I'm also going to be doing a presentation over at the Historical and Genealogical Society here in Indiana on November 4th. It's Thursday at 6:30. I'll be there. I'll have copies that people could purchase there, but it's on Amazon. It's on History Press, which is the publisher of the book, and you can pre-order now, and they'll ship it out next week.
Beautiful, beautiful. Pat, thanks for coming in to visit with us. It's a fascinating topic.
Hey, I appreciate it, Todd. Thanks for the time.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160.